بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, so quick recap, I suppose, of what we've covered. We're coming towards the end of the first semester. We've looked at Ghazali, we've looked at his life from a number of perspectives. We've looked at it in the context of the biographies written about him. We've looked at it in the context of the age in which he lived and the various social, political challenges of the age. We've also looked at it from his own words, and we've had we've looked at his authorship and looked at the importance of some of the works that he wrote in different sciences, so that we have an idea about who Ghazali was. Now, all of that is important because of something that I said to you right at the beginning of this class. I said, I'm not the teacher, I'm the qari, or I'm the muqri, but the teacher is Ghazali, and as far as possible the idea of this course is to let Ghazali talk in his own words. Now, I've not done very well so far, but all of this has been an introduction. Okay? Now, why is it important to have all this knowledge about Ghazali? About firstly his status as a religious scholar, his status as an imam, his mastery of theology, his mastery of fiqh and usulul fiqh, and so forth. Well, because he's in the Ihya, and right at the beginning of the Ihya, he is going to put all of that into context. He's going to put fiqh in its place. He's going to put kalam in its place. Alright? When you study a work of fiqh, when you study a work classically, normally you do what are called the mabadi wal ashra. Okay? The 10 sort of preliminary investigations into a science. What's the definition of the science? What's the source of, what's the istimdad? What is it based on? Who founded it? What are the various schools of thought regarding that sort of science? What is its subject matter? What is its importance, and so forth? And normally, when you get to the section of importance, virtually in any book that you read, it will say Ihya huwa ashraful ulum. Right? This is the noblest of the sciences. So you read a work of usul al-fiqh, and it will say huwa ashraful ulum. It is the most noble of the sciences. It's the greatest of the sciences. You read theology, huwa akbarul ulum. It's the greatest of the sciences. You read a work on grammar, and say, this is huwa ashraful ulum. It's the greatest of the sciences. Okay? Now, in one sense, that's correct. As a student, if you are studying a particular science, you need to give it your full attention. And to you, at that moment, it is the most important science. Alright? Because it is giving you a knowledge that you require for whatever benefit. Now, what Ghazali does is in the Ihya, he is reviving the ulumuddin. He is reviving the sciences of the religion. Alright? All the sciences of the religion. And in order to do that, you need to be able to have them in some kind of hierarchical structure, some sort of order. Ghazali loves classification. You'll see that through the Ihya, but he loves classification. And he actually classifies the religious sciences in about 4 or 5 works that he wrote. Okay? Earlier on today, we were talking about classification and why you classify things in a particular way. And I gave the example that, you can take a box of Quality Street, and you can take all the different chocolates inside, and you can classify them in different ways. So you can classify them according to color, for example. You can classify them according to taste. So certain things are more kind of chewy and other things are smoother. You can classify them according to, these have nuts in them and these don't have nuts in them. Alright? Why would you classify them in any of those particular ways? Because of a particular goal that you had in mind. Right? So you can imagine that a child, given a whole lot of quality streets, is in some sense is more interested in the paper than they, in the kind of shiny paper that they're wrapped in, than they are in the actual chocolates themselves, because they'll eat the chocolates, but then they'll use the paper maybe in a drawing or, for some kind of artwork. So you'd want to have all the reds together and all the purples together and all the yellows together. If it was about you sharing out the quality streets and you know that Habib doesn't like things with nuts in it, and Anika doesn't like stuff with fruit in it, okay, then if you've classified it in that way, you know who to give what to. Alright? So you can classify, whenever you see a classification, when you're studying the deen, you will find lots of classifications. Whenever you see a classification, you need to ask a question. What is the purpose of the classification? What was the one doing the classification intending when they broke it down in that way? Okay, so we earlier on were looking at a very cheery subject of divorce. Alright? And we looked at the different ways of classifying divorce. Okay? Now, Ghazali classifies the sciences. And in different works, he classifies them in different ways. So a very interesting classification is in one of his late works, written after the Ihya, called Jawahirul Quran. Right? Which is supposedly his inverted commas tafsir of Quran. It's not really a tafsir of Quran. What it is a breakdown of the religious sciences using Quranic verses as a template. Okay? So all the different types of knowledge that can be gleaned from the Quran broken down into different subheadings. Knowledge that applies to the next world, knowledge that applies to this world, knowledge that applies to this world and is about the purification of the heart, knowledge that applies to this world that is about the acts of the body, and so forth. And he classifies it in that way. And it's because Ghazali, I've made this point before, that a lot of scholars, what they did is they wrote commentaries, they wrote, summaries of other works and that type of stuff. And Ghazali did a bit of that. But largely, in terms of his authorship of unique works or original works, he has a very high proportion of original works as opposed to your commentaries, summaries, works that are based on another work. Okay? And you can, simply by looking at that, if you want to get an idea about what type of person Ghazali was, he was an ijtihadi type of person. Okay? As opposed to a taqlidi type person. Now, there's not that one's better than the other. Lots of scholars, so people like, let's take, Jalaluddin Suyuti. Okay? So some of Jalaluddin Suyuti's most famous works were commentaries of other works. He was a great, massive, huge scholar of Egypt. Alright? One of probably the Mujaddid of the 10th Islamic century. Right? One of the greatest Shafi'is ever to live. But a lot of his works were based on other works. Explanations, commentaries, expansions, and so forth. From Ghazali's perspective, a lot of his works were original works. Jawahir al-Quran, there's no parallel to Jawahir al-Quran anywhere. Either before or after. No one has done something like that. Yeah? Try to classify religious sciences or try to classify the Quran, the verses of Quran in terms of religious sciences. No one has done a work like the Ihya. Right? You'll see now, the commentaries on the Ihya. There's not many. It's amazing how, it's such an important work, but there's so few commentaries written on it. Largely because there's not much more you can say. There's not much more to say. It's so clear that it doesn't really need someone to go down and say, what does that word mean in this context? Right? It's so systematic that there's no more that you can add to it. Right? And it's so beneficial and it's so sort of well written that it's actually quite difficult to summarize, as you will find when you go through the summary. It's actually quite difficult to summarize without losing stuff. So what's the difference between a mukhtasar and a muqtasar? Mukhtasar with a kha and muqtasar with a qaf. Yes, now that's the point. That a muqtasar has qasr. There is a deficiency in it. Alright? In the sense that it leaves stuff out. So if I did, here is Quduri. If I did a muqtasar, so I'm doing, for the students who are studying it, a muqtasar of Kitab al-Nikah, the whole section on family law. Getting the most important points, putting them together in a nice sort of, 20 pages, you've got the whole thing there, it's done. Okay? It would be a muqtasar if I left out the section of zihar, li'an, idda, and I just did the remit. That's a muqtasar. Okay? It's very hard to do a mukhtasar of what Ghazali has written because it fits together in such a way that if you take anything out, you've missed a bit. Okay? But hey, we will do our best to do that anyway. But so this is the type of work that Ghazali wrote, and as I say, he classified these sciences. Now, when you classify sciences, you have to give precedence to some over others. All right? Now, what is the Ihya? We said that the Munqidh is often called Ghazali's autobiography, but it isn't really an autobiography. Yeah? It isn't really an autobiography. It is a defense of certain positions that he took. It is a statement of his epistemology, and it just does so. It happens to do so in a very personal way. So, where is his autobiography? And Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad has a very interesting take on this. He says that the Ihya is actually Ghazali's autobiography. The Ihya is the narration of Ghazali's journey of Tawbah. This was his Tawbah. Yeah? Which is a very interesting way of looking at the Ihya. That the Ihya is so powerful precisely because it is so personal. Now, having said that, Ghazali doesn't really there's not much I in the Ihya. This happened to me, I realized this. There's not that. But in what he says, and in the steps that he looks at, you can see that it is it's an examination of his own soul. Yeah? And it's what he put down on paper, what he went through, and what he had learned from his own experiences. And that's one of the things that makes it so powerful. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Ihya now, which is what we've been leading up to. Okay, so the Ihya Ulum ad-Din, the revival of the religious sciences. Okay, firstly, that's a hell of a title to give a book. Yeah. Quduri is probably the foundational text, not foundational text, but it's the most important short text in Hanafi fiqh. What's it called? What's its title? Quduri was the guy who wrote it. What's its title? Al-Kitab. Yeah? Any others? Al-Mukhtasar. Right? But what title did Quduri give it? He didn't. He didn't give the book a title. It's like lecture notes. You don't give your lecture notes a title. It was like that. It was called Al-Kitab later on. It was called Al-Mukhtasar later on. Quduri doesn't even have an introduction. It just starts Qala Allahu Ta'ala. Basically, that's how Quduri starts. He doesn't even start Bismillah ar-Rahman. He doesn't even write Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim there. The manuscripts just say Qala Allahu Ta'ala Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu idha kumtum ila salati faghsilu wujuhakum. That's how the book starts. Alright? Right? And then, some titles are based on their, topic and what have you. But the title of the Ihya is a statement of intent. It's a statement of intent. And it implies certain things. And the Ihya got people's backs up. In its time, it got people's backs up. And it got people's backs up for a reason. Okay? Ghazali is saying that this book is going to revive the religious sciences. Why do the religious sciences need reviving? Ihya is to bring to life. Why do they need reviving? This is the 5th century, beginning of the 5th century. Middle of the 5th century. Because they're dead. There is an assumption that is made that the religious sciences are dead. And this book is going to revive them. Okay? Not just one of them or two of them, all of them. All the ulumuddin. This book is going to breathe new life into them. Okay? And Ghazali names it the Ihya ulumuddin in the introduction. Alright? And so it is it's a strong statement to make. Okay? We may or may not get to the khutbah today. I wanted to type out the khutbah in good English for you because it's a very powerful khutbah. And the opening khutbah of the Ihya is unique among all the khutbahs of the Ihya. Yeah.
So are we actually going to be reading from the Ihya?
Yeah. Are we actually reading from the Ihya the Mukhtasar? We can read from the Ihya. We can read from but we will read excerpts of the Ihya. The reason I've chosen the Mukhtasar, have I told you this? We'll come to the I'll tell you today. Remind me. Okay. Yeah? Of course we're going to read from the Ihya. Right. So what about the Ihya? Oh, sorry, should I... Right. So, Ghazali's Ihya ulumuddin ranks as one of the most widely read books in Islam, having earned the praise of scholars and general acceptance of the community. This is from Shaykh Jibril Haddad. Among those who praised it, Ibn as-Subki, Tajuddin Ibn as-Subki, the grandson of Taqiyuddin as-Subki. It ranks among the books which Muslims must look after and spread far and wide. This is about 100 years later. It ranks among the books which Muslims must look after and spread far and wide so that many people may be guided by reading them. Seldom has anyone looked into this book except that he woke up on the spot thanks to it. May Allah grant us insight that shows us the way to the truth and protect us from what stands between us and the truth as a veil. Safadi, it is among the greatest and noblest of all books, to the extent that it was said concerning it that if all the books of Islam were to be lost except for the Ihya, it would suffice for what was lost. Okay, and one of those who said that was Imam Nawawi. Who, if you remember, obviously the great central figure in the late Shafi'i school, but whose central work on the Shafi'i school was based on Ghazali's text of Shafi'i fiqh. Alright? Fakhruddin al-Razi, it was as if Allah had gathered all the sciences under a dome and showed them to Ghazali. So there's a lot of praise for it. There are many other words of praise for the book as well. I don't have the notes that I made, unfortunately, so I'm using these. But it is a work that has found massive acceptance in the Ummah. Right? Now, a quick word on how books become widely known. How do books become widely known? Alright? So in our time, if you've got enough money, and I'm looking at certain places in the Muslim world, if you have enough money, then you can print out 10 million high quality copies of a particular book. Right? Let's say your translation of the Quran, let's say. Okay? You can print out 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 million copies of that book, high quality, good paper, looking beautiful, and you can distribute them for free all over the Muslim world. You can send one to every masjid in the world. Alright? And the book spreads. And it becomes well known. Alright? Before the printing press, how would a book become well known? How would a book become widely spread? Well, it becomes spread like this. So here is me sitting here giving a lesson. Here's you guys, you're sitting around and you're writing it down. Alright? Now, you don't have notes, you're writing it yourself. You write down what I'm saying, you go back, you check it, you correct it, and etc., etc. Then in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, you've become the teacher now. You're sitting here. And of all the books that you've gone through with all of your different teachers, alright? So over that 15 years, you've studied 10 books of fiqh with 10 different teachers. Now you're teaching a class. Which book do you pick to go through with your students? Alright? You'd put them in order of priority, wouldn't you? So I'm going to make sure I finish this book. I might pull in a bit from this book and a bit from this book, but I'm going to make sure I do this book, because this is the most useful book that I've studied on that subject. So you've done, the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Tahawi in Hanafi fiqh. You've done the, the works of, Tanbih al-Ghafilin of Abu Layth al-Samarqandi. You've done the Mukhtasar, the work of Quduri. You've done others as well. Which book do you pick? Because you say, actually, the book that is closest to that has the opinions, that is closest to the opinions of the early Hanafi Imams is Quduri. So I'm going to teach Quduri. I'm going to make sure I get through Quduri. I'm going to make sure the students know Quduri. If I've got time, I'll go through the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Tahawi as well. Okay? What happens then? Your students will also study lots of different books with lots of different people. Alright? Will take, when they're choosing to teach, when they come to teach, they pick one of those books. Which one do they pick? They also pick Quduri, because they also found it the most useful of all the things that they'd studied. What happens? Quduri is becoming more and more and more widespread. It has been transmitted down through the generations. It has been transmitted. So Anika will go to Leicester, and Anika settles down in Leicester, and she's teaching now. What I'm going to teach? I'll teach this. I'm not going to teach that. I'm not going to teach that. I'm going to teach this. Okay? So suddenly in Leicester there's a group of people studying that book as well. Okay? And then, Talha goes to London. And Talha says, I need to teach something. What should I teach? I'm going to teach the same thing. He picked the same thing as Anika. Why? Not because it's the only thing he studied, but because it was the best thing that he studied. It was the best thing that he studied. So he picks it, he starts teaching it, and now there is a centre there where those people are also teaching it. Where those people are also learning it. That's where the book starts to become widespread. And some of the other books, they're retained, they're transmitted. Alright, so in the public lessons you're doing Quduri. Someone said, I want to study more with you. Come on, we'll do the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Tahawi. But there's 50 people reading Quduri with you, and there's only 2 people reading the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Tahawi. Okay? So there were many books that were written that have been lost. They haven't always been lost because of war and natural disaster and that type of stuff. Sometimes they're simply lost because they weren't taught. What's the most famous example of this in early Islam? Anyone know? The legal school of Imam al-Awza'i. The legal school of Imam al-Awza'i. Okay? So who are the great early Imams? If you open up works like the hadith works, like the Jami' of Imam al-Tirmidhi, or the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, these are works of hadith, but they have a lot of legal opinions in them. Who do they cite? Whose legal opinions do they cite? They will talk about Shafi'i, they'll talk about Malik, they will talk about Ahmad, they will talk about the Kufans, by whom they mean Abu Hanifa. Alright? Then they will talk about Layth, Awza'i, and Sufyan. Layth ibn Sa'ad. They will talk about Sufyan al-Thawri. Whenever Sufyan is mentioned it's a point to students of knowledge. There are 2 great Sufyans of the very early period. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was a great hadith master of Mecca, and Sufyan al-Thawri, who was a great legal scholar. When the word Sufyan is mentioned in books of fiqh, it's regarding to Sufyan al-Thawri. When it's mentioned in books of hadith, it means Sufyan ibn Uyayna. In terms of, if it's mentioned in hadith, in a chain of transmission of hadith, you see an Sufyan, it means Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Okay? And they talk about Awza'i. It was well recognized. Even Shafi'i himself said, Awza'i is a more brilliant legal mind than me. But Awza'i did not have students of the caliber of the students of Shafi'i. So Awza'i's whole madhab fell away Why? There weren't enough students to maintain a critical mass required to transmit the madhab. But Shafi'i, Malik, Abu Hanifa, Ahmad bin Hanbal, there were sufficient students to build up a head of steam. You've got, so Malik, the great example, he's sitting there in Medina, but where is the Maliki school? There's a Maliki school in Baghdad, there's a Maliki school in Egypt, there's a Maliki school in Andalus, there's a Maliki school, even in Khurasan there was a Maliki school. Yeah? His students went all over the place, and they transmitted the madhab, and later on, people like, I'm saying Bajuri, much later on, took them all and said, okay, actually we've got this Baghdadi school which eventually fell away, we've got this school here, we've got the school in the Maghrib, we've got the school in Egypt. This is the positions of Malik that these guys transmitted, this is the positions of Malik, these guys transmitted, put them all together, and what do you have? You've got a whole process of legal scholarship that's going on now, right? Okay? What happened with Awza'i? Maybe he had 1-2 students who transmitted it, and they transmitted it to a few people. But at some point, either the quality or the number was not sufficient to maintain that school, and the school fell away. Even though the school of Awza'i was a very important early legal school. It influenced the development of the main legal schools. Okay? So the earliest work written on politics was the Siyar. Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani wrote a Siyar al-Saghir. Alright? Literally the smaller work on politics. At that time it was just called a Siyar. That work got to Awza'i in Syria. Awza'i asked a whole lot of questions and raised a whole lot of objections. In response to those objections, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani wrote As-Siyar al-Kabir, the great work on politics. And that then became the standard for Sunni constitutional law, inverted commas. Okay? Because of Awza'i's objections and reflections and so forth. Yes, sorry.
This politics also had quite a bit, also a certain some co-opted enough.
Yeah. In terms of what factors led to the spreading of a madhab, there were absolutely social, political, even economic sometimes factors. Okay? So it certainly isn't an ivory tower process. There were realistic considerations. The Hanafi school absolutely spread because it was the legal school of the Abbasids. Absolutely it spread for that reason. Yeah? But it also spread because it was written down. There was tadween, very early tadween. Tadween means to write it down in a book. There was tadween of the madhab right at the very beginning, and that was passed down. Yeah, but somebody lent me a very interesting CD set that I still have on the development of the early legal schools, and he's sitting here. Haven't given it back to him yet, but I will. And one of the interesting arguments that is made there is that the early legal schools, the ones that survived, grew up around garrison towns. So Kufa, Baghdad, Medina. I mean, Medina is Medina, but and so forth. And it's a theory, and I'm not sure how strong the theory is. But the one idea is that Awza'i's school didn't develop because it was in Damascus, and Damascus was kind of a sleepy little place. Whereas Kufa was this big bustling center with lots of kind of, legal cut and thrust and parry and so forth. Medina was central in the sense that loads of people would come to Medina. Right? It doesn't explain, however, why Mecca didn't develop a legal school. I mean, it's one of the very interesting facts of very early Islamic. The legal schools. Sorry, we're going on a diversion here, but the legal schools developed initially regionally. So there was the school of Medina, right, which Malik was the end of. Right? Now, I told you this before, that Malik didn't see himself as the beginning of something. Malik saw himself as the end of something. Malik said, I am the last living representative of the fiqh of Medina, of the Ahlul Medina. So I need to preserve the fiqh of the Ahlul Medina, the understanding of Islam of the people of Medina. Ghazali saw himself as the end of something. This is, that I am preserving the last traces of true Islam as it was practiced by the earliest generations. Yeah? But you have a school developing in Medina, you have a school developing in Kufa, a school developing in Damascus, and so forth. What you don't get, it's fascinating, is a school developing in Mecca. There is no early legal school of Mecca that we know of. Yeah? Which is, and I don't have an answer for why that is, but it's interesting. Then those schools, because then travel became a lot more widespread, then you have people, schools becoming internationalized effectively. Anyhow, so.
Last question.
Yes.
What mechanism was there to check what the students were taking back with them, back to the original point?
Now there's a very good question. What mechanism, since we're talking about legal schools, or for that matter the Ihya, what mechanism is there to check that Anika is actually teaching what I taught her? And she hasn't gone and interpolated a whole lot of stuff into it, right? Or that Talha has done that. Well, how do I do that? That's the role of the great scholars that came later on. They'd go to Talha and they studied with Talha or get Talha's works. They'd go to Anika, they'd get her works. They'd compare them. They'd cross-reference them. Hang on a sec. These two people with the same teacher have given a different ruling for the same issue. Why? Is this an issue that is situation specific or place specific? Right? So Talha is asked a question about, should you buy a house or rent? Now Talha's in London. Talha said, forget about buying a house, just rent one. Right? Anika's in Leicester. House prices are half. She should buy a house. So there is a reason for that. Okay, fine. But there's no reason. One is saying you don't need to make intention when you do tayammum. The other is saying you do need to make intention when you make tayammum. What happens now? Now you either try to go one step up to the common source, that's me, and what did I teach? Is there anything that is in my own writing? Or you look for other students of mine. Right? So you're going to go to, you're going to go to see what Maryam had to say. You're going to go and see what Asfar had to say, because they're also students of mine. And if you find that actually everyone seems to be saying what Anika said, except for Talha, then you need to ask, why is Talha's position different? This position becomes a mashhur, and that position becomes a shadh position. It becomes an anomalous position. Okay? In order for you to be able to do that, to critique, to cross-reference, you've got to have multiple transmissions. If you've got one who transmits from one, you've got no way of checking it. Okay? And the point, the early Hanafi works, which are called the Zahir al-Riwaya, okay, are given. There were many works transmitted by the Imams, but the Zahir al-Riwaya are the 6 great works of the early school. The positions of Abu Hanifa, of Abu Yusuf and Muhammad. Why are they given precedence? Because they are transmitted by mass transmission. There are 10, 15, 20, 30 transmissions of the text. So now when you are on your world tour of Hanafi cities, okay, you are finding a teacher in that city who has taught Jami' al-Saghir. A teacher in this city, same Jami' al-Saghir. In this city. Now you've got all of those, Jawami al-Saghair together, okay, and you're comparing them. And now you can see actually this is a very strong transmission. This position is opposed to it. It is shadh. So we're going to put that position to one side. We're going to say, we're going to make tawaqquf. We're not sure if this is a correct position or not. But because so many people have transmitted, yes, you have to make intention when you do tayammum, this therefore must be the authentic position of the Imam. Okay? So you can see the level of, the level of critical appraisal that took place. And this, you can imagine now, sometimes they say, you will hear sometimes people saying, how come the works of usulul fiqh only, actual proper works of usulul fiqh only came 200 years after the works of fiqh were written? What happened in that 200-year period? What were these scholars in that 200 years doing? Sitting around, sitting and having halwa and going for maulid? No, Baba, they were internally critiquing the school in this way. They were doing exactly what Bukhari and Muslim and Tirmidhi and Abu Dawud did for hadith, these scholars like Juzajani, like Abu Hafs Kabir and so forth, that they did this for the Hanafi school. People like the students of Muzani and so forth did it for the Shafi'i school. People like, I don't know the Maliki, the second generation Malikis, but their students would have done that in the Maliki school, like Sahnun. Okay, people like Sahnun and stuff like that. They would have done that in the Maliki school. Okay, and that's the process of the consolidation of the school, the weeding out of incorrect opinions. Are you sure that Anika, when she was writing this particular, she was listening, but because she's a woman, she was sitting at the back, and maybe there was a bit she couldn't hear because on that day, my voice had gone, and so she couldn't hear very well. So she thought she heard something, but she missed out the la. Right? She missed out the don't bit. So she wrote down the ruling wrong, and she wrote it, and for whatever reason she didn't correct it, or she didn't come back to it, and then she ended up teaching it. They were figuring out those types of things. But in order to do that, you need multitudes to transmit from multitudes who transmit from multitudes. Now, the text of Quduri is about half the size of this book. Alright? About half this. This is the Ihya, and this is books 1 to 3 out of 40 of the Ihya. Alright? And the writing is about the same size. The Ihya is probably about 20 times longer or 10 times longer than a work like Quduri. And what that means is when you're sitting there writing down the Ihya, because you still got no printing presses, when you're sitting there, you've got to sit 10 times longer. So rather than taking a year to go through Quduri, it would take you 10 years to get through the Ihya. Now, what level of dedication would you have to sit for 10 years or 5 years or whatever, studying the Ihya and writing it down word for word? Alright? So 10 times the dedication involved. Alright? And yet a work like the Ihya is transmitted from multitudes to multitudes. Why? Because this is a mark of the benefit of the book. A mark of the benefit of the work, that it was, and this is, had Ghazali, remember what we did in the last session, that he went back to teaching. Yeah? So, he anti-Yodered. He came out of seclusion. And he went back into, back into the rat race, as it were. Yeah? Why? Probably to transmit this book. Because those 5-6 Sufis that would come and sit with him in his khanqah in Tus, they ain't going to spread this book around the world. You got to go to the Nizamiya of Nisapur, which is basically like going to Yale and teach it at Yale or teach it at Cambridge. Yeah? That's where you get the big scholars coming. That's where you get the students who are going to, they gather in that place, they learn, and then they disperse back to their homelands or wherever. And this is where the Ihya was spread. Okay? And it was spread because people found a tremendous benefit in that work, and they saw the point of writing it down, copying it out, taking it back, 20 years later, teaching that work. Okay? And it is the type of work that every time, I will say, you can, and I've done this, because I've randomly opened the Ihya to a page and just read a bit, and you just kind of think, wow. And that's the type of work. Believe me, works of fiqh, it doesn't happen like that. If you open a work of fiqh to a random page, there's probably going to be a page about, how methods of divorcing your wife, 348, that type of thing. But I remember I had to give a talk once, and I had to give a talk on the effects of isolation on communities and on mental health. All right. And I did the normal. I went and looked at the academic papers and blah 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 blah. Then I thought, Ghazali has a section on khalwa. There's a book of khalwa in there here. Yeah, I wonder whether he's got a section on afatul khalwa, right? On the harms of isolation. Of course he does, because it's Ghazali, and of course he's going to have that. I opened it up, and I ended up flipping out, basing the entire talk on what Ghazali said about the harms of seclusion. Because it was just so beneficial, and it was so relevant, no matter where you are in the world, and no matter who you're talking to, it was just so relevant what he said, because he went into the psychological underpinnings of seclusion and how it harms you, and this. Yeah? So it's a very beneficial work, and that's why it spread. That's why it spread, okay? Alright, so a few things about the Ihya before we kind of get into it. One is in regards to the hadith. Now, one of the greatest criticisms of the Ihya, when a work spreads, it gets criticized, especially a work that is as polemical as the Ihya. As I said to you, Ghazali really did not mince his words, especially in the beginning of the work. He really didn't mince his words. Okay? And the Ihya was criticized, and it was critiqued. Okay? And we'll look at the critiques in a sec. But one of the things it was critiqued about was the usage of hadith. And a lot of the scholars said, now, again, this is about time and place. This is about time and place. Okay? Why is the Hanafi school critiqued? What's the greatest critique of the Hanafi school? It's you use rubbish hadith. You use weak, and I say rubbish hadith, isn't that kufr? Isn't it? To say rubbish hadith? How can you say anything that the Prophet ﷺ said was rubbish? But hadith is what? What's a hadith? It's a matan and a sanad together. And when you say this is a weak hadith, da'if, hadith wahin, yeah, hadith matruk, it's a hadith that you chuck. What are you referring to? You're referring to its isnad. You're saying the Prophet ﷺ didn't say this. Alright? It's the use of hadith with chains of transmission. In fact, one of the, I think I've probably said this to you guys before, but one of the great works of hadith critique is the Sunan of Imam ad-Daraqutni. Now this is what the Hanafis are on you, right? Any Shafi'is, I apologize. Daraqutni was a Shafi'i, and he was a proper Shafi'i, right? He wrote a work, and he took all the hadith that the Hanafis used as evidence, and basically did the isnads. This is rubbish. This one's got 3 links missing, man. What are you playing at? Right? This hadith here, it's got this narrator is weak. Right? And one of the things and Hanafis love this book. You'll find in the Hanafi texts, you'll find the Hanafi scholars who've written and this on this hadith, and there'll be a footnote, and the footnote will say Sunan ad-Daraqutni, Sunan ad-Daraqutni, Sunan ad-Daraqutni. And yes, it was written specifically to critique the Hanafi school. Right? And it was to show how weak the hadith basis of the Hanafi school was. Right? But because Daraqutni was a great muhaddith, he went and gathered all the chains of transmission and put them all together. Hanafi's going to go, Jazakallah khair, you put all the chains of transmission together. Right. If you take these 10 chains of transmission that Imam ad-Daraqutni has so obligingly provided to us, what you find is that this hadith is Hasan li ghayrihi. It's now become Hasan li ghayrihi. Or they will, Daraqutni said this hadith is weak. It's weak because the companion is not mentioned. So Daraqutni says it's a mursal hadith according to the principles of the muhaddithin. A mursal hadith is da'if, it's weak. A hadith where you miss the companion link out. So Hasan al-Basri says, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? Always Qarin didn't, but you know always Qarin is a tabi', right? He never met the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So he says, Qala Rasulullah. But how, he never heard the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. How can he say that? So this, according to the muhaddithin, is weak. Hanafi say, but we accept weak hadith. We accept mursal hadith. So thank you for getting us the chain of transmission. We accept this hadith though. Alright? But the Hanafi school was critiqued because of laxity in authenticating reports to the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because at the time of the early Hanafi school, generally there was laxity. They're not laxity, but there were different principles that applied. Okay? It's later on. It's in the time of Shafi'i, which is a generation and a bit later on. Right? And especially thereafter, that critiquing hadith is the be-all and the end-all. The validity and the usefulness of a work depends on how strong the hadith chains of transmission are. That's what counts. The Maliki school is criticized for exactly the same thing. What is this Amal Ahl Madina you're talking about? Where's the sanad? I want to see a sanad. Don't tell me the people of Medina do it, or the scholars of Medina do it. I want to see a sanad. And if you can't show me a sanad, I don't accept it. You put your hands by your sides when you pray? Nope. The hadiths are weak. I don't care if the scholars of Medina used to do it. They're not the Prophet ﷺ. Where's the chain of transmission? Okay? In the time Ghazali is writing, he is writing right in the middle of the canonization of the works of hadith. It is around the time of Ghazali that you now start to find people saying Bukhari and Muslim are the bee's knees. Bukhari and Muslim are the top dogs. Right? The most authentic work after the Kitabullah is the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. That we're going to take the Jami' of Imam al-Tirmidhi and we're going to put that in the Sihah Sittah. So in the phase that Ghazali is writing, hadith authentication is everything. And Ghazali is using weak hadith after weak hadith after weak hadith after weak hadith. Okay? So, how do you square the fact that you've got a book that is clearly beneficial, but is full of weak hadith, right? Al-Maziri was a great Maliki hadith master, and he basically said the book is crammed full of forgeries. That was his take on the Ihya. It is crammed full of forgeries. Okay? What do you do? So let's look at the hadith documentation. Hadith masters documented almost every single hadith in the Ihya without questioning its usefulness as a whole, accepting its immense standing among Muslims and contributing to its embellishment and spread as a manual for spiritual progress. So, you've got this initial critique of the Ihya. It didn't stop the spreading of the Ihya because people still found benefit in it. And Ghazali was a master of every science except hadith. And it's fascinating, actually, that he did, in all of the stuff he studied, he didn't study hadith. And when we say study hadith, we don't mean like we're talking about. It's not like he didn't read the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi. He would have read Bukhari, he would have read Muslim, and I'll show you how you know that. He would have read those works. But in terms of, he was kind of, the second Shafi'i in fiqh and usul. He was the second Ashari in terms of theology. He was, Avicenna made right in terms of philosophy. Right? I mean, he reached the top of every field he was. You would have expected him to be Ibn Salah. Right? In hadith methodology. You'd expected him to end up like Bukhari in terms of narrating of hadith, in terms of critiquing hadith. And had he lived, it didn't take him long to do these things. Had he lived another 3-4 years, he probably would have been. Because he started studying hadith at the end. But, no, he had an okay grasp of hadith. Okay? But the thing is, of all the schools of law, the one that is most identified with hadith, not sunnah, they're all identified with sunnah and how they understand sunnah, but with hadith specifically is the Shafi'i school. The Shafi'i school. It was Shafi'i that said hadith, specifically isnad, critique of the method, so is front and center. If I've got a hadith with a strong sanad to the Prophet ﷺ, then if that contradicts the action of every single person in Medina, I don't care. I take the sanad over the actions of the people of Medina. Right? In terms of the Hanafis have a concept, sunnah mutawatira. It's a sunnah that everyone does. Yeah? Oh Hanafis, why don't you read the basmala aloud in the prayer? Where's your hadith to prove that you don't read the basmala aloud in the prayer? We don't have a hadith. We don't need a hadith. You know why? whenever we pray in the masjid, says Abu Hanifa, says Abu Yusuf, and so forth, the practice of the people is not to read the basmala aloud. And the great scholars do not read the basmala aloud. So it is a sunnah mutawatira. It's a mass transmitted sunnah. You don't need a hadith for that. You don't need a hadith, because there is no way that all of these people would not act on the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ if it was the sunnah. Okay? So they're different, but in terms of the sunnah as being defined as that which is known by hadith, that's the Shafi'i school. And yet, Ghazali's knowledge of hadith critique was not what you'd expect it to be. Alright? So, a lot of scholars rejected the Ihya for that reason. What happens is that as time went on, people said, well, let's look at the Ihya and let's document all the hadith. Right? And the famous one is Zayn ad-Din al-Iraqi, the teacher of Imam al-Nawawi, right? In Al-Mughni and Haml al-Isfar, he documented all of the hadith. Sorry, not the student, the teacher of Ibn Hajar, al-Asqalani. He documented most of the hadiths. He gave their chains of transmission. He gave rulings on them. His student, who is Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, completed that work. Okay, and he did all the other hadith. Tajuddin as-Subki, in his biography of Ghazali is about 50 pages long. Of those 50 pages, 30 of them are documentations of problematic, inverted commas, problematic hadiths in the Ihya. Okay, Imam as-Suyuti later on came and took those problematic hadith that Tajuddin Subki said, I can find strong sanads for all of the hadith in the Ihya except for these, and there are about 100 of them. I can't find decent asanid for these hadith. Suyuti came along and found asanid for those hadith. Right? He said, all except for about 4 or 5. I couldn't find a sanad for. Okay? And then the great Hanafi, Al-Qasim ibn Qutl-Bugha, he spelled that wrong, Qutl-Bugha al-Hanafi, in his work on hadith, he was a great hadith scholar, a student of Ibn al-Humam, for those Hanafi students among you, student of Ibn al-Humam, and one of the transmitters of the Fath al-Qadir of Ibn al-Humam. And then the greatest commentary of the Ihya, which was the Sayyid Murtaza al-Zabidi al-Husayni al-Gujurati, because he was a Guji, right? He was Gujarati, and he's moved to Yemen, and he lived and he died in Yemen. The Ithaf as-Sa'ada, again that's spelt wrong, Ithaf as-Sa'ada al-Muttaqeen fi Shar' Asrar Ihya Ulum ad-Din, in 10 massive volumes. Okay, and each scholar completed the documentation of the previous scholar. So the hadiths are well documented. Okay, now a note on Ghazali's use of hadith as a general principle. What you will find is where you find the hadith often is in the fada'il of a particular thing. So Kitab al-Ilm begins with Fada'il al-Ilm, the blessings of knowledge, the blessings of seeking knowledge, the blessings of teaching, and so forth. And there are lots of hadiths in there. Okay, almost invariably, the first 1, 2, 3 hadith that are mentioned are sahih. The first few hadith, whenever he mentions a series of hadith one after the other, you will find that the first couple are Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, that type of thing. Okay? Whatever comes after will be weaker and found in less less canonical works of hadith. But by that point, you actually don't really even need those. Those hadith are nurun ala nur. They are just there to give shahid or shahada to the hadith that came before them, to add a bit of detail, to bolster up the hadith that came before. Okay, and that's why a lot of the critique of the Ihya fell away, because a lot of the hadiths are weak. Let's take them all out. What have you lost? Very little. Very little. Okay? And that's the point. And you do find that even hadith scholars, did Bukhari use weak hadith? Did Bukhari admit to the usage of weak hadith? Absolutely he did. Right? He wrote, what's the work? Al-Adab al-Mufrad. Al-Adab al-Mufrad is a work of adab. It's a work of good manners, good character. Okay? It begins, I think, with birrul walidain. You know, treating your parents well. And it goes through all these different things. And it's, to use Al-Maziri's, to incorporate Al-Maziri's work, it's crammed full of weak hadith. Why? Because you can use weak hadith provided you are not establishing a legal rule. Alright? If you want to establish the fact that, I don't know, collective dhikr is permissible, then you need a proof that is legally countenanced. Quranic verse with a decent understanding, a hadith that is sahih or hasan, right? So a hadith that has a decent isnad. Okay? Once you've established it, then to show that it's a blessed thing to do, you can use a weak hadith. You can use weak hadith then to show that it's because a weak hadith is not a hadith. You're not saying the Prophet ﷺ never said this. You're saying, I'm not sure if the Prophet ﷺ said this. However, I am sure that he said this. Okay? And you'll see as we go through. I'll show you some examples of that, inshallah. Yeah? Okay. In terms of commentaries on the Ihya, the greatest commentary, and the only one you need, he says, who doesn't have it, is the work of Murtaza Az-Zabidi. His 10-volume. It's coming. Someone actually bought it for me, but then has decided to keep it in their house. And I haven't been able to get down there and get it from him yet. He sort of said, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough type thing. It's like, come on then, you can come, by all means feel free to come pick it up. So I have to go and get it. But anyway, إتحاف السعادة المتقين على شرح أسرار إحياء علوم الدين. Okay? And that documents a hadith very well, but it also explains some of the words Ghazali uses, some very interesting, very useful things in the Ihya, very useful things in that work. You have the work of Abdul Qadir ibn Abdullah al-Aidarus, which is, to be honest, not really a commentary. This work is more of a work of praise. It defends the Ihya against the detractors of the Ihya. It's written around the same time as Zabidi wrote. You got Mullah Ali Qari, who wrote a commentary on an abridgment of the Ihya, and he says, I wrote this commentary on the abridgment of the Ihya by the proof of Islam and the confirmation of creation, Ghazali, hoping to receive some of the outpouring of blessings from the words of the most pure knowers of Allah, and to benefit from the gifts that exude from the pages of the Shaykhs and the saints, so that I may be mentioned in their number and raised in their gathering, even if I fell short in their following and their service. For I rely on my love of them and content myself with my longing for them. And I think we can all say Ameen to that. We can all say Ameen to that. Alright. As mentioned, there were some critiques of the Ihya. Largely, this is an interesting story actually. The Ihya was burnt in Al-Andalus on the recommendation of the Qadi Ibn Hamdain, who was named commander of the believers in Qurtuba in 539, then fled to Malaga, where he died. Shortly thereafter, the Moroccans rehabilitated the work as stated by Shaykh al-Islam Taqiyuddin as-Subki. And in a long poem, which he begins, Abu Hamid, you are the one who is truly Abu Hamid, one who deserves praise. And Subki narrates with a chain of transmission from Abu Hassan al-Shadhili that one of the Moroccan sheikhs who had intended the burning of the Ihya saw the Prophet ﷺ in a dream. And the dream was that this is narrated by Abu Hassan al-Shadhili, who is also the person who, I'll explain to you. But he is also so he narrates that this sheikh who had commanded that the Ihya be burnt, okay, because it was for whatever, either it contained weak hadith or it was full of heresy. All right, he had a dream and he saw himself with the Prophet ﷺ, and he saw that the Prophet ﷺ was commending Ghazali, commending the Ihya, and Ghazali that Ghazali had complained to the Prophet ﷺ about this person, Ya Rasulullah, this person is slandering me. He's slandering me. He said, I've committed heresy and so on and so forth. And the Prophet ﷺ praised the Ihya and ordered that Ibn Hirzam, I'm not sure that's his name, I'm sure I remember a different name, but Harazim, yeah, that he be lashed for slander. When he woke up, he felt the pain of the lashes, and he saw the traces of the lashing on his back. Then he made tawbah and he took praising the book from Kafir. It's a very famous story. Another rallying cry of the critics of the Ihya is that it contains no exhortation towards jihad, which is true. There is no book of jihad. There is no kitab al-jihad in the Ihya. Okay. There is the 19th book of the Ihya is Kitab Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy Anil Munkar. The enjoining of good and the forbidding of evil. Ghazali does mention jihad there, and he is Hanbali in his approach to Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy Anil Munkar. I mean, he's really strict. He's really strict on that. Yeah. So there's kind of, you can go into someone's house if you strongly suspect that they have, wine in their house, you can go into their house, you can break into their house and smash the wine caskets, and that you can do all that. Yeah, so he's almost Hanbali. And one of the things that the critics of the Ihya, even modern Salafi critics of the Ihya, praise Ghazali for is the Kitab Amr bil Ma'ruf, and he said that bit's okay, the rest of it you can chuck it, basically. Yeah? So it's quite interesting. The other thing that Ghazali doesn't have is a work on statecraft. There's no book on rulership, in the Ihya. Now, in the Persian summary of the Ihya, which was written later, the Kimiyat al-Sa'ada, there is a book on rulership, and that's very interesting. That he doesn't have a book on rulership in the Arabic Ihya that's written for scholars, but he does have a book on rulership in the Persian Ihya that was written for the Persian elite, because they were the rulers and they weren't that comfortable in Arabic. And well, I've already answered the question. It's why he did it in one and not in the other. Okay. Also, that the author remained in seclusion between the years of 488 and 499, at the time when the Crusaders ravaged Antioch and Al-Quds, killing Muslims by tens of thousands. Okay. Yusuf al-Qaradawi replied to this. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, modern scholar, the Qatari scholar, that his excuse, maybe his most pressing engagement, was the reformation of his own self, one's personal corruption that paves the way for external invasions, and so on and so forth. Quite possibly, I think a more likely reason for it is that Ghazali wasn't there. That he wasn't there. That he spent 2 years in Syria, Damascus, Jerusalem, then went for Hajj, then went to Baghdad, and went from Baghdad back to Khurasan, and spent the rest of his seclusion in Khurasan rather than in Al-Quds, because it would have been very difficult for him to be there. At that time, Al-Quds was even before the Crusaders, Al-Quds was under the rulership of the Fatimids. And given that he'd already written 3 works against the Fatimids, it probably would not have been a good idea to be Ghazali there at that time. Okay. Taqiyuddin al-Subki says about detractors of the Ihya, I consider them similar to a group of pious and devoted men who saw a great knight issue forth from the ranks of the Muslims and enter the fray of their enemies, striking and battling until he subdued them and unnerved them, breaking their ranks and routing them. Then he emerged, covered with their blood, went to wash himself and entered the place of prayer with the Muslims. But that group thought he still had some of his blood he still had some of their blood on his person, and they criticized him. You're not in wudu, or you're not. Your tahara is not complete. Right? This is Taqiyuddin Subki's way of saying nitpickers. You're nitpicking. Okay. All right. So this is about the Ihya. Ghazali himself explains the division of the Ihya. I'll finish off with a few reflections, and these are from Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad last Saturday, which is why you guys didn't have a class last Saturday. And he gave some, I think, very pertinent comments. Now, some of you maybe have heard the recording, but for those of you who haven't, it's a summary of it here. He firstly said that the way of the ulama is to spend significant time on each book of the Ihya, unlocking its complexities and subtleties. Right? So the Ihya is not a book that you skim. It's not a book that you skim. Okay? Even a cursory glance at the books of fiqh in it seemed pretty straightforward at first read through. But when you look deeper, you find there's a lot of subtleties in there. Okay? He then asked a question. He said, and this is the general point that he made at the beginning of his talk. He said, look, and this is again, says the premier, the premier Ghazalian of our time, the Ihya is not a sacred text. It's not Quran. You can feel free to disagree with Ghazali's positions, to criticize positions that he took on certain issues. Okay? The point about the Ihya, Ghazali wasn't writing for us in the 21st century. And this was probably said in response to critiques about Ghazali. This thing that's quite common in, quite fashionable in academia, to say that Ghazali was a misogynist. Okay? And one of the reasons for that is in Kitab al-Nikah, when he talks about the afat of marriage. Right? And there's a few points where he says, or the adab of marriage, and he will say things like, it is praiseworthy, to be patient with your wife and bear with the deficiencies of women and that sort of stuff, right? And people people reading it, and because they, everyone like, when you like someone and then you read something that they've said, that you kind of go, well, hold on a sec. You strongly identify with someone, and you read something that they've written, and you say, well, hold on a sec. You can kind of have an almost reaction formation to that. You kind of, oh, finally we found a Muslim scholar who's wonderful, and he talks about spirituality, and he talks about all this lovely stuff, and he's not just talking about killing people and jihad and this and that and the other. And what does he say about women? You get that kind of response. Yeah? Look, Baba, Ghazali was a Persian living 1,000 years ago, right? And he's a man of his time, right? And there will absolutely be attitudes that he has that are not going to fit into your lovely enlightened 21st century view of how things should be. Okay? Does it mean that we are wrong and Ghazali was right? No. What he said was appropriate for his time, and basically the point Shaykh Abdul Hakim is mentioning is what you should do is not slavishly follow everything in the Ihya, because to be honest, if you try to do everything the Ihya says, you'll die. Right? Especially when you get to the stuff about restricting your appetite. You'll just die today if you try to do it. You'll end up in hospital. Alright? You'll end up with, you'll be seeing Dr. Saad after 5 hours in A&E, right? Just after the 4 hour limit. Alright? So he says what you should be doing is looking at Ghazali's manhaj. Understand the principles that he uses, apply what is relevant. A lot of the Ihya is word for word relevant in every time and in every place, because he's talking about the human nature, and human nature hasn't changed. But some of it is specific to his time, specific to his situation, and those things you should take with what is the manhaj he's applying, and use that manhaj to apply to your own time. Shaykh Abdul Hakim actually said, we shouldn't be afraid of challenging notions that no longer apply to us. Okay? It's a period piece. He wasn't writing to the people of our times. Don't make it scripture. Alright? The primary point is that religion is alive. The religion is a living religion. It is the whole call of the Ihya is to bring to mind the purpose and the meaning of the religion, to activate the principle of niyyah, without which nothing else counts. It is not a spiritualizing of religion so much as an interiorizing of religion. That's the point of the Ihya, that you interiorize, you bring it inside you, right? And he said, we find that our minds, our bodies and our souls are out of sync. You're praying right? But there is a disjunct in you because your mind is not aligned to what your body is doing. Your heart is not present when you're praying. And this is what we need to learn from Ihya. Okay? He said to focus specifically on his Ghazali's critique of the ulama. Ghazali's critique of the ulama. Because his critique of the ulama in his time can easily be made for the ulama of our time, which is that they have retreated from engaging with the challenges of the world. And when they engage with the challenges of the world, they do it in a haphazard and slipshod way. Ghazali said, I looked at the refutations that were out there of the philosophers, the refutations of the Batinis, and I found they were largely ad hominem. They were largely just, yeah, he said that, but he's an idiot. And that's the refutation. Yeah, it's like, oh, how do you refute evolution? Well, if you believe in evolution, it means you believe your uncle is a monkey. What kind of a refutation is that? What kind of a refutation is that? So when you do address it, you address it in in an unsystematic and uneducated, although you may be very educated in other things, you don't bother to educate yourself in what you're trying to critique. Right? Well, that's precisely what happens today. Here we have, this is debating the permissibility of crow meat. When the Mongols are at the gates of Baghdad, you've got people leaving Islam. You've got people hijacking the very meaning of religion, of what it means to be a religion, what it means to be religious. People are hijacking that. Who is standing up and saying that is not what religion means? This is what religion means. I was in Cardiff, some of you guys may know, I was in Cardiff, and I was asked to talk about the need for religion in the 21st century. And I asked the question, there's various bits and bobs I spoke about, but I said, do we need religion in the 21st century? Not religion as a political ideology, we don't know. No, we don't need that. Yeah? Not religion as a means of command and control. No, we don't need that. Society has moved on. Yeah? The fact that the Bedouin Arabs, under the leadership of Sahaba, unquestionably under the leadership of Sahaba, conquered with actual battles Persia, the Middle East, and so forth, does not mean that it is appropriate to do the same thing in the 21st century when we have weapons of mass destruction, when we have weapons that could annihilate the entire planet. You cannot simply make a one-to-one similar. You have to, and I said we don't need religion like that, but religion in terms of understanding what religion actually is, which is, and I said, what is the difference between a religion and an ideology like communism? Now I said, look, a religion, any religion, does three things. It tells you the reality of your own nature. What does it mean to be a human? It tells you something about the soul. It tells you something about ultimate reality. Any religion, whether it's talking about Allah or whether it's Buddhism talking about nirvana as an ultimate reality. It tells you something about your reality, it tells you something about ultimate reality, and it tells you about the link between the two. How to move from your reality to ultimate reality. Every religion does that. Okay? And I said in the Quran, it is the very first address of the Quran. It does exactly this. Ya ayyuhan nas u'budu rabbakum. Ya nas u'budu rabbakum. Khalas. What's that? Nas, your reality. Rabb, Allah, the ultimate reality. Ibadah, the connection. What's the meaning of nas? Nisyan, uns. Right? What's the meaning of nas? You desire closeness, you desire love. This is the meaning of uns. The joy you feel What does it mean to be human? It's nas. You're a nas. You're a human being. What does that mean? You feel utter joy. You stood before God. You feel absolute joy in the presence of absolute beauty and absolute perfection. But because that's what it means to be nas. But you've forgotten. You've forgotten the source. So you spend, from the day instant you're born, the first thing that you do is cry. Why is the soul crying? It wants that communion with God. Right? So what do? Give the baby some food. And that settles that desire for a little while. After a while the desire comes back, cries again, give it some more food. Comes back again, make it warm. Comes back again, starts to cry. Give the baby comfort. And slowly the baby learns, you and I, every single one of us learn that you find comfort in food, in clothing, in the love of your mother or the love of someone, physical contact, interaction, whatever it happens to be, and it settles you. It's a placebo. You've got this constant headache and it just settles you for a bit and settles you for a bit. Why? Why are we never satisfied with what we have? Why is the belly of the son of Adam never content? If you give a valley of gold, he wants a second valley of gold. Why? Why? Because what you are yearning for is something that is greater than all of the world, that is infinite, but you've forgotten. You've forgotten what you're looking for. What is the Rabb? The Rabb is the one in whom you find. That's why it's Rabbukum, your Rabb. Not Ya ayyuhan nas u'budullaha. Ya ayyuhan nas u'budu rabbakum. Your Lord, the one who gives you, who fills you up, who is the ultimate source of your ultimate happiness. That's the ultimate reality. That's, O mankind, what you are, every single one of you, searching for. That's the happiness you're looking for in your life. It's your Rabb, the one who you came from, the one who you will return to, the one who is the only one who is infinite enough to fulfill the infinite yearning that you have. How do you get there? Ibadah. Ibadah. And the whole of the Ihya, I said the Ihya has no genre. So here's a genre for the Ihya. It is a work of ibadah. It is a description of ibadah, of how that nas returns to its Rabb. It begins with knowledge, it goes through the physical acts of worship, it goes through the acts of worship that relate to human beings, it goes through the acts of worship that relate to removal of negative qualities that veil you from God, and then the acts of worship that relate to installation or the acquisition of beneficial qualities that open the window so that you can approach God, and it ends with you being with God. It ends with the book of the remembrance of death and the afterlife, and it ends with the vision of God. That's the Ihya. It's a work of ibadah. From beginning to end, it's a work of ibadah. Right? It explains, and this is why all the books of Islam could be lost, and the Ihya would suffice to revive them. Why? Because it explains what nas is, it explains what the Rabb is, and explains what ibadah is. And that's all any human being needs to know. Full stop. And I said, I didn't explain all that at the talk, I'm saying that to you. But what I said is, do we need religion in the 21st century? That type of religion? Who am I? You know, Foucault, Shaykh Abdul Hakim mentioned this. Foucault, this great, near contemporary philosopher, Western philosopher, gave a 4-hour talk on spirituality, right, in Paris, in the University of Paris once. And what he said is, we are the only civilization, the Western civilization, the only civilization whose philosophy is not based on the knowledge of the self. If you don't know who you are, who is philosophizing? How can you know what makes you happy if you don't know what you are? That is why every traditional system of thought has begun with know thyself. Know thyself. Aristotle said it's written above the cave of the oracle of Delphi. Know thyself. Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabba. The one who knows himself knows the Lord. Every society has understood that, except for the society in which we live. Why? Because if you take away a belief in ultimate reality, then the meaning of your reality no longer has a meaning. Your reality no longer, it is a leaf that is blown by the wind. It is not fixed to the tree. Alright? If you just saw a leaf, you've never seen a tree before and you just saw a leaf, you think, what is this thing? What does it do? What is its purpose? How does it fit? It's only when you see a leaf on a tree that you realize the reason for the leaf. And the leaf has no purpose without the tree. The only point of the leaf is to photosynthesize and to create energy, and for the energy to be transmitted around the tree. No tree, what's the point of a leaf? So you've got the whole of Western civilization that is based on human beings, on that there is no tree. Right? La shajara illa al-waraqa. There's no tree, there's only a leaf. There's only leaves. And we wonder why that at an existential level people are lost. And why they are blown by every current, every wind. Why? Because life has no meaning, no ultimate meaning, if you take away ultimate reality. Right? Why is the Ihya sufficient to revive the religion in any generation? To revive the broad meaning of religion for anyone, in any generation, at any point in history, because it explains Nas, Ibadah, Rabb. That's why. And that's why we study the Ihya. That's the purpose. That's why I'm going to try to teach it. Right? It's to fulfill that cause. So we'll end with that, inshallah. It's probably a good place to end. We'll be studying summary of the Ihya, simply because, and the summary we've chosen, Ghazali summarized the Ihya in various places. The Kitab al-Arba'in, which inshallah maybe during one of the PTS retreats we'll try to cover, the Kitab al-Arba'in is 40 principles. That's very useful, but it's a very condensed summary of the Ihya. The Kimiyat al-Sa'ada is a Persian work. I don't think it has a really good English translation yet, okay? And I don't speak Persian. And there, Ayyuhal Walad, if you can, it got all the main. Ayyuhal Walad has all the headlines of the Ihya. That's why it's very nice to study Ayyuhal Walad. Okay. As I say, in some ways, the Jawahir al-Quran can be understood as, if you like, Ghazali's kind of Quranic commentary on the Ihya, if you like. Yeah. The work that we're going to be, the actual text that we're going to be going through is called the Mukhtasar Ihya Ulumuddin. It's that orange book for those of you who have it, right? I will send out the English PDFs to you. Okay? We will start it inshallah from next week. We're going to go into we're going to do the khutbah. Okay, wait, hang on. There's no class next week, but the next lesson we'll be doing the khutbah, because I think Shaykh Sa'ad got through, I think only about pages of khutbah. So okay, we'll do the whole of the khutbah of the Ihya, and then we'll get into the summary. The way that we'll do it, the reason I'm using that summary, the summary was probably not written by Ghazali. Let's be clear, it doesn't have his style. Ghazali has an inimitable style. There was one of the famous modern day Arab literateurs said that that the four greatest writers in Arab literature ever. There's two modern and two classical. I don't know who the modern ones are. The classical ones were Jahid, and Jahid was a very famous Mu'tazili scholar from the early Islamic times, who was a brilliant writer of prose. We're talking, not poetry. As a writer of prose, just a brilliant. His works are studied even in some traditional madaris. His works are studied simply because his writing is so brilliant, right? And the other one is Ghazali. The Ghazali's prose was just beautiful. It just flows. Okay? And the Mukhtasar doesn't have that same quality to it in Arabic. And you can tell. But The reason I'm using the Mukhtasar is that it follows the structure of the Ihya exactly. Ghazali has a chapter on the blessings of knowledge, and then on the blessings of teaching and whatever, and this book follows it exactly. And what that allows us to do is say, so for those of you who are going to be following along with the English Mukhtasar, right? So those of you whose Arabic is not strong enough yet to read the Arabic Mukhtasar, you can just read that section before each class. You'll be prepared for the class. Okay? And you can follow along and you can annotate and take your extra notes. Those of you who are going through Arabic, the Ihya might be a bit much to try and cover, because I can't be asking you to prepare 20 pages in a week. Instead, you'll be preparing half a page. So read the Arabic and try to make sense of the Arabic. Okay? For those of you whose Arabic is more advanced, by all means feel free. If you've got the time, by all means feel free to read that section. But in every case, you're reading a section. So each of you, either using the English summary or the Arabic summary or the full Ihya, will be preparing a section. Alright? What I will do is, as we go through the summary, I will pull things out that Ghazali has mentioned in the main Ihya itself, so the excerpts of the Ihya itself. And if I can, Sa'ad, I know you're asking, if I am organised enough, which is not necessarily the case, I will try to tell you which bits I'm going to be doing, so you can read through those, which excerpts I will be pulling, and then you can read through those bits. Okay? Certain sections we will spend a lot more time on. So, Adab al-Ta'allum, just be warned. Ghazali's presentation on the etiquette of seeking knowledge is fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah? And we'll go through that from the Ihya, word for word. Alright? There's a couple of other sections we'll do that in as well. The longest book of the Ihya is Kitab al-Ilm. Right? Pretty much. Alright? The other sections are a bit shorter. We'll cover inshallah as we go through. Okay? That's how we'll do it. And hopefully, we will let's inshallah, we begin with light, we end with light inshallah as well, and we see it strong through the end. So next week I'm not here, so no class next week. Sorry, this period has been a bit busy for me, so there's been no class next week. The week after, what I want to do is to bring the Ihya class early. So start at about 8:30, finish at about 10ish, and then I need to head off to somewhere, right? So, but then from the week after that, we should be just back to normal again. Okay? Okay. So, any questions? The Arabic? I will send you a PDF. I'll send the PDF of the Arabic out. Or I'll get Ihsan, I should say, to send the Arabic PDF out, inshallah, yeah? And I'll send the English PDF out as well. I haven't heard from the publishers of it, but I'm going to send the PDF out to you. Don't spread it, obviously. Keep it to yourself, right? For some reason, these guys, when you buy the book, they give you a PDF as well. I don't know why, but they give you a PDF of the text as well. So I'll send it out to you all as well, okay? So you will have the summary, and you'll have the English summary and the Arabic summary. And those of you who have the Ihya, if you want to buy the Ihya, this is the best edition of the Ihya. It's the Darul Minhaj edition of the Ihya. But there are a number of decent editions of the Ihya out there. Yeah. Lastly, I did have a rant on the WhatsApp group. Please put your summaries down. All right, on the YouTube recordings, please put your summaries down. It allows me to know whether you have actually taken anything away. As I've said, this is not a barakah class. Right? It's not. If you want to do a barakah class, I'll do Riyadh al-Salihin. Right? This is not a barakah class. This is a class for people who want to engage with the text, okay, and to think about it. So I want you to write down 3. If you can't think of 3, one thing is fine too. If someone else has said exactly what you wanted to say in exactly the way you wanted to say it, say that. Alright? Say that is fine. Alright? But I don't want to see these YouTube videos going up and then see 2 comments from the same 2 people. And that includes you a lot. I know you're sitting in the class, no matter. You can sit in the class and go like this, Ji, mashallah, Ji, alhamdulillah, and not take anything in. And believe me, most people do. Honestly, let's be honest. Most people in the class, the more they're doing this, you're thinking, oh, I wonder when the football's starting. Oh, I wonder what the score is. Oh. I want to see that you're taking it on board. So let's get those comments going, especially once we start the Ihya itself, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair to all of you. Allah bless you all. Sorry for the fact that we've been going here and there and having class, no class. Inshallah, once these people stop bothering me, I will be able to teach normally on Saturday morning. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Bi rahmatika ya arhamar